Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Vintage Motocross Radio. I am your host, Joe Abadi. Today's show is made possible with the help of our sponsors, Motion Pro, for all your specialized tools, controls, and cables. Nightmare Racing, the best reproduction Kawasaki plastic on the planet. AMSOIL, the first in synthetic oil since 1973. Vintco, keep the ride going. Full Circle Racing, whether it's vintage or modern, go to Full Circle for spokes, rims, lacing, and truing. Preston Petty Products. The legend continues. My guest this morning has spent over 4 decades in the motorcycle industry as a test rider, mechanic, racer, and photographer. He's traveled the world and has captured some of the most iconic photos that you'll ever see at racing events throughout the world. He was born in France and as a young boy moved to Southern California, where he grew up during the golden age of motocross. He's published several books about motorcycle racing and has done some narration work on several video projects. He's also had numerous photos included in dozens of calendars throughout the years. It is my pleasure this morning to have as my guest, Mr. Joe Bonnello. Joe, are you there?
I'm there, Joe. And there goes the whole show after that glorious introduction.
My guest today has been Joe Bonnello. Joe, thanks for spending time with me.
Listen, my pleasure. Goodbye. Thank you. See you.
Joe, with your career and all the things you have done, I had to shorten it up actually because you have covered a lot of ground throughout your time in the motorcycle industry between photography and racing and so many other things. But I guess the first thing I want to know is, Joe, where did your introduction to motocross and motorcycles begin?
Well, okay, so here's what happened. I was living in Sylmar, California, which is in the San Fernando Valley.
Okay.
So I'm sure some of your listeners, and Sylmar is a community that's right up against the San Gabriel mountain range.
Mm-hmm.
So there was tons of places to ride motorcycles, but the first thing, there was a gentleman named Bob Farmer, who I've never seen since. He had a Honda Super 90. You remember the beautiful little, with the elliptical tank?
I do, yes.
Yeah, and I don't remember how I met him. I was 14 or 13, and I got on the back of it, and he took me for a ride around the corner, around the block kind of thing.
And you were like how old, Joe?
I think I was 13.
Okay.
I shouldn't just start, a lot of guys start when they're, 1.5,
Yeah.
like Jeff Ward. But I was 13, so I was kind of a latecomer, and from that moment on, I was hooked. There was something about the motion of that motorcycle, and all the guys that ride that are listening to this right now can relate to me.
Yeah.
And then the first real bike that I rode by myself was a Triumph Tiger 200 Cub, and when I rode that thing, I died. That was it. So I had to have a motorcycle. And I saved up some money. I was working part-time at the pool or some shit. I don't even remember. And I bought a Hodaka 90 for $150. And that was my first, oh, God. But what was cool is living in Sylmar, in the San Fernando, you could ride all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
Everywhere. It was all olive orchards and tangerine orchards. And then we were right at the base of the mountain, literally, right up against, so you could tear all over the place. And that was when, I completely and totally fell in love with riding motorcycles. Dirt bikes and street bikes, too.
Now, you were born in France, Joe, but how old were you when you moved to California?
I think, hey, I can't remember all this stuff.
Okay. Do the best you can.
But I think I was 10 years old, and I think it was 1963.
Okay.
And, but I'd already started to learn how to speak English, which is really, we don't speak English. We speak American, which is the crudest language in the world. But I learned how to speak English, American, because my mother, bless her heart, she was a French lady. She used to buy me copies of Mad Magazine.
Yeah.
I'm serious about this. But because, those, and comic books.
Yeah.
Especially Superman, and then there was another one there with anyway. But because comic books are written, in those blurbs,
Yes.
you can see it. It's a visual, so you can pronounce the words. It's not like somebody just says, "Hey, Wang Jung Huing," and you go, "What the fuck is that?" But if you look at it, you go, "I got it." Yeah.
And it's geared toward a younger audience, and that was a really good idea too. So
It was,
You
yeah,
know?
and that's maybe where part of my sense of humor comes from. I kept reading Mad Magazine, which was the best magazine of all time, and I still miss it. But so by the time we came to America, I was already in second or third grade because I'd gone. My father was in the military, so I started school at the military school at the air base in Rhein-Main, Germany. So I'd already kind of had a foothold on how to speak the language, and so it wasn't that big a deal. So he retired from the Air Force or whatever the hell he did. I don't know much about the guy. I never really cared much for him. But so we landed here, and I lived in Glendale, California, and I've always been a voracious reader, and I read everything, every book, every magazine, anything I could get my hand on, I love to read. So it made learning the language and the culture and everything really easy, to be honest with you. It was no big deal.
So,
But the thing about the bike starts with Bob Farmer and his Honda S90.
and after that, you go to the Hodaka. You're 13 years old, but this is still the 60s now. So we're not really we may not even be talking about scrambles yet. So what was your introduction, or how did you, as far as competition goes, how did that progress?
I went to, God, I forget. But anyway, hey, I can just make shit up. Who's going to know, right?
Joe, nobody knows. Say whatever, just come up with something.
Right. But I used to get copies of Cycle World and Cycle and Motorcyclist and Modern Cycle because I was all obsessed with motorcycles. And there were these pictures of these motocross guys and enduro guys and dirt bike guys. Mm-hmm. And I thought, oh, this is cool. So somebody that was in my town there in Fillmore took me. We were about the same age, but him and his father went, hey, bring Joe. And we're going to go to a race at this place called Carlsbad, California, which was really far away. It was about 100 and something miles from the San Fernando Valley. That was the first race I went to. And there was some guy named Gary Bailey. I don't know whatever happened to him.
So now this is in the 60s.
Yes.
Okay.
And Lars Larson.
Yes.
The Swedish guy. He was riding a Mako.
Uh-huh.
And Gary Bailey at the time, in these days, everybody rode 2 or 3 classes. Gary Bailey rode a Sax with that leading link front end, the
I do, and Earl's front end, sure.
Yeah, horrid piece of shit. But anyway, and then he rode 250 and 500 class on Greaves, which were probably the worst motorcycles ever made in the history of really bad motorcycles. And he won all 3 classes, and there was 3 motos. So he rode a total of 9 motos that day. And he won all 9, and he was this big, tall, goofy-looking guy. And they were metal flake. The Greaves were metal flake blue and metal flake red. Metal flake.
Yes.
Imagine that.
Yes.
Yeah. Not much. You restore bikes. You know what I'm talking about.
I do.
But he rode the Sax in the 125 class, and he won all 9 motos that day. And I went, and that was it. And I was in love, and I had to do it. So that was kind of the seed that was planted in my feeble brain.
And you've still got this little Hodaka, or now have you progressed, or you've saved your money and went out and bought a little scrambler? What happens from there?
No, actually, I got a job working at a repair shop in the San Fernando Valley. Tommy's Motorcycle. It's one of those little places, they just do repairs and work on bikes. It wasn't a franchise dealer.
Right.
And I saved up $600, and I bought a Mako 250. I think it was an X4A. I may be wrong on this. Mm-hmm. But it was just so cool looking at it. I had to have it. So I went from by the way, the Hodaka, I rode every day.
Oh.
And because I could ride from my house in the San Fernando Valley. You could moto all over the place then. There was a big sand wash. You go up the trail. I rode that thing all over the place. I got rid of it. I forget who I sold it to. It was some guy. By that time, the thing was ruined anyway. It was ruined before it was even ridden. But anyway, I bought a Mako X4A used from Cole Brothers, who were two very successful desert racers. They had a shop in the San Fernando Valley in Van Nuys. It was called Cole Brothers. And they were it was one of the cool shops. And I bought a Mako 250 from them. So I went from the Hodaka to the Mako. And it was like, going from a Piper Cub to a spaceship.
Yeah.
I felt like Buzz Aldrin, And so I rode the Mako. And the first day I rode it, it was a revelation. You go from a piece of shit trail bike to an actual motorcycle. And so then from that point on, I was hooked. And I was riding every day because I could ride from the house. I had to go down a few streets, but nobody gave a shit in those days. But anyway, so anyway, I started riding the Mako. And then I got into street bikes, and the first street bike I had was a Honda CL72, a 250 Scrambler. And which was cool, because, again, I'm a motorcycle guy. I ride anything, except for choppers and those stupid things with the car tires on it. That's not motorcycle riding, but
you're a real enthusiast, and if it burns gas and it's got two wheels, you're on it.
I'll ride the gun. Yeah. So anyway, there was a bunch of racetracks in Southern California at the time. There still is, but at that time, the population explosion hadn't really taken bloom. Mm-hmm. And there was at least more than a dozen racetracks just in Southern California. But the one that was kind of closest to where I was in Simi Valley, which is the next valley over from the San Fernando Valley.
Yes.
And the place was called Bay Mare. And I heard parts of it are still there. There's still some remnants of some of the hills and stuff. Anyway, it eventually turned into a housing project, just like all of Southern California. But anyway, I forget how, but somehow I ended up there on the Hodaka, and I raced 2 or 3 races on it, and I actually won the second moto that I ever raced. It was in the 100 junior class. Anyway, so I bought the Mako. I started riding at Bay Mare. And the reason I started riding there is because I could get somebody to help me to get a ride there. They'd take my bike for me. You know what I mean? We'd pool our money together, and we'd go race Bay Mare. And it was a fabulous racetrack. They even had an interim there with Ben Dahlberg and Arnie Kring and Aki Janssen and blah, blah. Anyway, so I had just enough money. I was working part-time at the shop and just kind of scrambling to get some money together. And but there was all these other racetracks, but most of the guys stuck to one track or another. The CMC guys, they always rode Carlsbad and Saddleback, and then there was Bay Mare. But I wanted to ride all the different tracks. I wanted to see the world. So the minute I had a few bucks saved up, okay, so here's the other thing, by the way. This will relate to you.
Yeah.
We were at Bay Mare one day, and they had this big, I don't know, it was like a big, it wasn't a Trans Am or anything. It was just a big, like, $2,500 purse day. And these guys came out from New England.
Yeah, it was the Interam. It's one of the first Interams, probably.
No. It was before that. It was before the Interam.
Oh. Yeah.
And there was a guy, and you know who I'm talking about, named Super Joe Einhorn.
The motorcycle jumper.
No. No, Joe Einhorn rode a Bultaco. He was the New England's motocross champion.
He did some jumping too. He did some stunts. But yeah, Joe Einhorn was from New England, and so he's on this Bultaco. Go ahead.
And I'm racing my Mako, and I saw that Bultaco. And he smoked the field, by the way. He killed everybody. Mm-hmm. And he was kind of a big, fat, ugly-looking guy, too. He didn't look like a motocross rider. And there was a couple of other guys named Barry Higgins and Sonny DeFeo,
Yeah.
who, of course, were the legends of Pepperell and that whole scene. And we'd heard about these guys because motocross actually started on the East Coast. It didn't start out here. It started where you lived.
Yeah.
In New England,
Yeah.
in Massachusetts, and New York, Pennsylvania. And I was just fascinated by the Bull Taco. So I sold the Mako, which by that time was completely fucking hammered. And I had just enough money saved up to buy a 250 Persang, the first of the, they were red with the silver stripes on them.
Yes.
I think it was a Mark III. It might have been a Mark IV. I don't know. But it was just so beautiful. And I went down to Steve's Bull Taco in Van Nuys, California. And it cost me $995, I remember, plus tax. And I think it came out to $1,024 or some shit. And I had a Bull Taco because I wanted to be like Super Joe Einhorn. Plus, it just looked cool. And it was way cooler looking than a CZ or a Mako or a Husky. They just were. And it was faster than shit. So that was kind of the way I got started riding motocross on the Bull Taco. And that started a 10-year-long love affair with Bull Tacos. And I raced them for years. And I know people think, oh, they blow up all the time. Mine were the most reliable bikes I've ever ridden.
You know, it was the same thing back, then, or you'll hear people talk about it now about reliability of certain bikes. And it's a European bike. It's all about maintenance. And it's no difference, when something goes wrong in those days with a Jaguar or a Mercedes or a Ferrari or anything else, it's not a Ford or a Chevy. When something doesn't look right or doesn't sound right, it's time to give some attention to that item. You can't just keep going and expect it to last. So that's...
Absolutely, 100%.
In fact,
listen, the bike, at one point, the bike started to run rich. And I'm broke. I'm just getting by from week to week trying to make it to the races as an amateur.
Mm-hmm.
And it just started running funny. I go, oh, no. I'm going to have to do a top-end job on it because the rings are worn out or some shit. I don't know. And I went down to Steve's Bull Taco. That was the Bull Taco shop at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Out here in the West Coast, or at least in the San Fernando Valley. There were 3 or 4 others. But anyway, and I told, his name is Alan, and I forget his last name, but he was a wonderful guy that worked, that was half owner of the shop. And he goes, most likely your needle jet's worn out. I went, what? He goes, it's a brass needle jet, and the needle, when the bike's running, it vibrates in there, and eventually it wears out the brass a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
They start to run rich. So he sold me a needle jet for $2.70. Instead of pulling the bike apart, and putting rings and a piston. I didn't have money yet. Remember then you'd bore them out, and then bore it out, you had to work on it. I put the needle jet in it, and it was like new. It ran perfect. So I was good for another, I don't know how long on that thing, but I remember I did take apart the top end once just because I felt guilty.
Yeah.
I go, it's got to need a piston and shit. And so I pulled the top end off. It was in perfect condition. I'd been riding it for 13 months.
Oh.
And by the way, I rode all week on it, and then I'd ride it on the weekends. And it was perfect. I put crank seals in it, which cost about $4 to put in.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then while I had so I bought a ring set for it. They had the Dykes ring. Remember the L-shaped ring?
I do.
Yeah, and it didn't even need it, but it was weird that thing would run. It probably had 500 hours on it, and it was still in perfect condition. I used to change the shock oil. We'd put ATF in there, automatic transmission fluid, and I could rebuild those betas while they were still in the bike. You just unbolt the top, and then you tilt them back, and you pop the springs off. And then, drain the oil out of them, put some new oil in them, and slap them back together. Try that one anyway.
No, that's not happening with too many bikes. And it's, to hear your story about being a young guy and doing the maintenance on your own bike, it's refreshing. It's wonderful to hear stories like that. And so let me ask you this. Were your parents behind you with this whole motorcycle racing thing? No, huh?
Not at all. I left home when I was 17. Um, my mother was the most wonderful French lady in the world, and my father was not.
Okay.
And well, I'll leave it at that. I was gone at 17, and on my own, and doing the best I could to keep racing. But and the other thing is, like I say, growing up in Southern California, this was the hotbed of motorcycle racing.
Mm-hmm.
There were no less than 10 tracks. There were thousands of guys that rode. Again, it was a different climate than it is now.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody had bikes, and you could ride all over the place. I had at least 10 different tracks. I had all sorts of illegal trails through the forest and up on the mountains on the side of the hill and shit. We just tore it up. And nobody really gave a shit. It didn't matter. And then there were the San Diego guys, which was that whole subculture. They had a bunch of tracks down there. Verona Oaks and Carlsbad and some others. Then there was Saddleback Carlsbad. And Saddleback Carlsbad was the heartland of West Coast racing. Mm-hmm. Those were the two tracks. And then there was the whole night scene. There were 5 or 6 different tracks that you could race on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday nights. And then you could race Saturday, Saddleback, and then Sunday at Carlsbad or Saddleback. Well, there were a bunch of guys, a guy named Dave Pesci, who I never met, but he was an OSA rider.
Yeah, he's on Facebook, Dave Pesci. He's around.
Oh, is he really?
Yeah.
He was good, man. Those guys used to make a pretty good living racing the night series. Mm. Mike Bell rode it. A bunch of other guys. They could make $200 or $300 a night because they'd race 2 or 3 classes. Well, if you do that 3 or 4 nights a week, they were making over $1,000 a week in the 1970s.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that, by the way, there's a lot of people these days that aren't making that. But there was a whole group of guys that did just the night races alone and would occasionally do the, Saturday or Sunday. But every Saturday, Saddleback Park, which was concrete.
Yeah.
By the way, it's still there. I sent you a picture of it.
Yeah, I have it.
The track is still there. It's unaltered. Saddleback, you can go to Saddleback Park right now, park on the side of the road, climb under the same barbed wire, kind of fence that they used. It was still there. It's the same one. You can walk around the whole track right now.
Yeah, it's a little overgrown, but yeah, from the air, from like
overgrown. Yeah.
But from a drone shot, you could actually see where the track still is, where the starting gate was.
You can see the whole thing. The bonsai downhill and all of the classic, the Magoo jump, the Magoo doubles, and all that shit.
Now, Joe, with this Bultaco thing, didn't you go on to be a mechanic for some of the professional?
Yes.
I want to know more. I'd like to know more about that. So you kind of wean off the racing a little bit by 18 or 19, but you're surrounded by these guys. And how do you wind up being a wrench at Bultaco?
It's called poverty.
Yeah. Oh. Well,
I was actually in my 20s by then.
Okay.
But there was a guy named Dave Rogers who lives not far from me now. And he was, by the way, a very good rider in his day, too. He used to win a 125 and 250 pro class. He was solid. He was good. Anyway, Bultaco decided to form a team over here. Mm-hmm. And Dave Rogers got the job being the team manager. It was called Equipo Bultaco, which means, Team Bultaco. Equipo is an equipe, whatever. Anyway. And I don't know where I talked to him or where I saw him, but I didn't have any money, and he goes, well, listen, he goes, we're going to Florida. He goes, I need some mechanics. He goes, you want to be a Bultaco mechanic? And I went, yeah, sounds good to me.
Wow.
And he goes, you can be Tom Rapp's mechanic. And I went, oh my God, Tom Rapp is one of the fastest guys in Southern California. He's CMC number 1 3 or 4 times. CMC was the club then. So that's how I got into working on bikes instead of riding. Although I snuck rides off on the side all the time. I'd take one off, in fact. Anyway, he hired me to work for Tom Rapp, and the first gig we got was driving, and he's the first guy, Dave Rogers is the first guy, to have a semi. He bought this big fifth-wheel trailer. It was 30 feet long, and it what do you call those hitches where you hitch it in the middle of a pickup truck?
It's called a fifth wheel.
Yeah, fifth wheel. Thank you. It was a fifth wheel, and he had it all outfitted on, and he had a graphic on the side. This is 20 years before the semis.
Oh yeah, that's unheard of at that time to have a rig like that.
Unheard of. Everybody had either a van or a box van. Box vans were the coolest. You know, say, oh, I got a box van. Oh my God. Yeah, it was, it was like big time. Anyway, all the teams ran out of box vans. They didn't run out of Kawasaki and Honda, Yamaha. Anyway, he was the first guy to do the big trailer. And the first gig we got, it was on a Thursday. I remember it. It was raining in Southern California. I think that's the last time it rained here. It might have rained in between, but anyway. Yeah. We're going to Virginia Beach, Virginia. And we were in Orange County, deep within the bowels of Los Angeles, the southern metropolis area. And we drove from LA to Virginia Beach, Virginia, and the reason why is because Bultaco East, there was Bultaco West and Bultaco East. Bultaco East was in Virginia Beach. Mm-hmm. And we were going there to pick up more bikes and get them prepped. And from Virginia Beach, we were going straight to Florida. And by the way, it's not that close.
No, it isn't.
Right, to do the Florida Winter Ram Series.
Who else was on that team, Joe? You had a couple other guys on that team, too.
Yes, it was Tom Rapp, Ronnie Pomeroy.
Yeah.
Briar Holcomb, who's still a good friend of mine. He might be listening to this right now.
Yeah.
And, who was the fourth guy?
I think it was Eddie Cole.
No, Eddie Cole came much later.
Oh, okay.
Who was the fourth guy? God, I can't think of him right now. God, boy, am I embarrassed.
No, nothing to be embarrassed about.
Anyway, it was, Kenny Zart.
Okay.
It was Kenny Zart, who, by the way, is no longer with us, poor guy. I absolutely love the guy. He was one of the nicest people I've ever worked for. But anyway, and known as a friend. But anyway,
so you're a mechanic now, and you're in Virginia. Now you're going to Florida. What happens down there?
Yeah, so the first race is in St. Petersburg, Florida, at Sunshine Raceway, which was run by Bill and Jerry West, who later became very well known because they ran part of the Pace Supercross series. They were the promoters for that whole area down there.
Yeah, and you know what? I believe Bill West is listening this morning. He did make some comments on this during the week. So, yeah.
Man, I hope. Listen, by the way, one of the nicest people I've ever met. I'm still indebted to him. He took me in. That's another story entirely. But, Bill, if you're listening, I still love you. We're still friends. And I won't say anything about those Mexican prostitutes. I promise. But anyway, I think they were Mexican. But anyway, Bill and Jerry West were wonderful. I don't know if Jerry's still around, but last time I saw him was like 20 years ago. Anyway, they ran the whole Florida Winter Series, which was the series back in the 1970s. Everybody went to Florida to ride the Winter Ram.
Yes.
That was if you were anybody, you were there.
Yeah, I was just talking to Tony DeStefano about that last week, and it was a big deal for you guys, and and you being there as a mechanic had to be a great experience for sure. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Right, and we're in Florida, and the temperature's about 185 degrees, and the humidity. They raced there yesterday, by the way.
Yeah.
After Nash, I'm sure everybody was watching, but anyway, I got to go there. And so I started working on Tom Rapp's bike, and he was riding a 360 Bultaco, which is a great motorcycle, by the way. And then he got hurt. So Dave Rogers' team, work for, I went from him, I was helping a guy named Earl Lyons work on Ronnie Pomeroy's bike. Oh, Ronnie Pomeroy was the other rider. Mm-hmm. And he was riding a 250. So I just helped out, working on his bike, and then something happened to him. So then I got moved to Briar Holcomb. Now, I knew Briar from Southern California anyway. He might be listening. So then I started working on Briar's bike. Now, he already had a mechanic, so I was just helping him out. You know what I mean? Like, you do the motor, I'll do the frame, or you do the frame, I'll do the motor, whatever the hell it was. And so it kind of went on and on from there. And then I ended up working for Kenny Zart, who was one of the weirdest guys in the world.
Why is that?
Because he was the Travis Pastrana before Travis Pastrana was. And he was the first guy to start doing the no-handers. Remember the picture of him on an OSA on the cover of, I think it was, not Motorcyclist Magazine, but one of the other magazines, where he had his hands over his eyes. He was the first guy to take his hands off the bars.
Yeah, and I do remember some races too where at intermission, or if there was a Saturday and a Sunday race, they would have a jumping contest. And I remember clearly him winning a few of those when guys weren't jumping like they were jumping today, that's for sure.
No.
So yeah.
His name is Scott Heidbrink. He might be listening to this too. Scott, if you have it, send the picture.
Yeah.
To Joe Abate.
Yeah.
It was at, he was one of those guys, he had no fear. He was the first guy to start doing like 180s. And it was an Indian dude. I was there. He was going up this embankment. It was about a 10-foot embankment. You know, an embankment, it's vertical.
Yeah.
And he'd ride up it and he'd do a flip. He'd flip the bike and do a 180 and then come back down like the skateboard guys do. Nobody ever did that on a motorcycle. It was unthinkable. For him, it was all right. I forget the year, but Evel Knievel was jumping the Snake River.
73, Boise, Idaho. They just celebrated
it was at the Snake River in Idaho. Yeah, I was there. But I was hurt, and I wanted to race that. I already entered the thing, even though, I wasn't really at the same level as the fast guys up there, like Gary Chaplin and Johnny Southern, those guys. But I still got, to ride it. But just before the race, I hurt my knee out trail riding, and I could barely walk. But I already paid for the entry, so me and two buddies drove from Southern California to Idaho, because Evel Knievel was going to jump over the Snake River on that rocket bike.
Yes.
Right. And by the way, Evel Knievel, to everybody, the guy was a complete crook and a conniver and a racist. He was just a rotten. But he had
the greatest showman and stuntman that ever lived. Go on. I'm not saying he wasn't. I'm not saying he might not have been the other things that you said he was. But
no, he was a rotten, conniving bastard.
But he was certainly a showman, and
Right. But he couldn't. By the way, he was a terrible motorcycle rider. The guy could hardly ride. He was a total spode. But he had balls the size of Cleveland.
That's
you know
true.
What I mean? He had no fear, and he was a great self-promoter. Anyway, so we got on the Snake River night. I'm not riding. But one of the things that they did is the promoters, because there was a motocross that went with it. It was a $10,000 purse.
Mm-hmm.
And it coincided with the Knievel thing. It was a private guy up there that did the thing. And they had a jump contest. And so everybody, like I said, it was DeSoto and Blackwell, and I mentioned again Gary Chaplin, who was a great rider at the time. Still is, pretty much.
Yeah.
But anyway, what they did was, it was just a fire road. And it had it stepped down. It was flat, and then it dropped about 10 feet. So when you're driving, you just kind of go down this thing. And the jump contest was just to launch it off the fire road, and they'd measure it like at the Olympics, like the long jump.
Yeah.
So all the guys were doing this. Mike Runyard was there, Gunnar Lindstrom, all sorts of great riders of the day. And Kenny Zart, and there's a Scott Heidbrink. If you're listening to me, send your photo to Joe about that. I might have it.
Yeah, I've seen that picture, and that picture really came to mind when you said things about Kenny doing some crazy jumps. That's the first picture that came to my mind when you said that. So yes, I am familiar with it. And
so listen to this.
Go ahead.
I'm saying that what I did is I walked down, And all you do is, it was just a flat landing. You just jump off this thing and then see how far you can go. That's it. There's no... Kenny Zart goes out there on the 250 Bultaco that I worked on and built for him, but he was wearing a T-shirt and corduroy pants and hush puppies. Remember those, the shoes?
Joe, I can see the picture in my mind's eye right now. I know exactly what you're talking about.
And he's wearing an open helmet with no goggles.
Yeah.
In other words, you know, the kind of stuff that you wear when you're standing around in the pits.
Right.
He hops on the Bultaco, and he absolutely, because everybody kind of, you know, when you get to the drop-off, you kind of let up a little. He hits third, hits fourth, and he never blipped. And he's wearing hush puppies, crepe-soled shoes. He must have, when he hit the ground so hard that his hand came off the bar momentarily, his right wrist.
Yes.
And he actually gassed it. And when he gassed it, he saved it. It went, whoa! He out-jumped everybody by 40 or 50 feet. It wasn't even close. And the crowd erupted. And that was it. He got the 10,000 or whatever the purse was for the jump of 5,000. But it was one of the great pictures. And again, my friend Scott Heidbrink, who was a wonderful photographer at that, this is years before I ever picked up a camera, he got the one picture of Kenny Zart going, and that picture should be in the Hall of Fame, and Kenny Zart should be in the Hall of Fame. Because he's the first guy to take his hands off the bars and do the... Remember, he folded his arms while he was in midair, and he'd cover his eyes, and all that shit was in Modern Cycle or on the cover of Popular Cycling or some shit. There was about 20 magazines then. He was a wonderful guy. I worked for him and built bikes for him for some time. And then some years ago, poor guy, he had some problems and literally dropped dead in front of his shop. He was working on suspension. And he just literally dropped dead right there at the front door of his shop, and somebody found him laying there. And but we stayed in touch, and we stayed friends for over 30 years.
And that's that. And, hey, Joe, you okay?
No.
All right, take a minute, brother. Just take a minute, and when you're up to it again, we will get back to talking more about Joe Bonnello and his career as a racer, a photographer, as a mechanic for Team Bultaco, and in a moment, I'm going to be asking him about why he wore pink Bultaco gear. This is long before Brock Glover. You know, and
years before, I'm sorry about that. I had to
no,
kind of...
that's okay. I mean, this is a question that Kurt Evans and so many other guys wanted to know. That you were certainly a trendsetter back in those days. You came out one day with pink gear. What were you thinking, Joe? Where'd that come from?
Well, Tom Rapp was still a good friend of mine. Was the most stylish guy, and he painted. And I remember he always had the perfect outfit, the perfect bike. He just had this wonderful knack for color, and he was, by the way, he was CMC number 1 3 years in a row, if I'm not mistaken, and a great rider. But anyway, he painted his helmet baby blue, and at the time, remember everybody was wearing silver and blue and red, you know, the regular colors that came with a bell or a whatever, usual crap. And the baby blue was the most beautiful color I'd ever seen, and we were at Saddleback. So a few weeks later, there used to be a place called Standard Brands Hardware or Standard Brands Paints. It was a big line of, you know, like Lowe's now or Home Depot or whatever. It was the 1970s, and all these fluorescent colors were coming out. But I wanted to do kind of that same shade of light blue, but in a different color. I didn't want to do it. So I found some pink paint, and I painted just my helmet pink. That's how it started.
Okay.
everybody went nuts. They go, what? Fuck you. Again, it's the Southern California scene. There's hundreds of people at the races. It's packed. And I remember one day after the races at Saddleback, we were sitting in my Ford van, and I don't know who said it, but somebody had the mistake of saying, gee, I wonder when is he going to paint his bike pink? And I heard it, you know what I mean? There was about 6 or 7.
Yeah.
And I don't know who said it. And I went, just wait, motherfucker. So that week, I went to Standard Brands Paint, and they just came out with this line of new paints. They were like fluorescent blue, fluorescent orange. I forget what they were called. It was a trade name. And they had a paint that was not really purple or pink, but it was pink purple. And it was just bitchin' looking. I go, okay. So I bought 2 or 3 cans of it. And in those days, remember, paint was still, it wasn't water-based, so you could paint your bike, and if you spilled gas on it, it wouldn't wash off.
Yeah.
Yeah, now you can't do that. You got to clear coat everything and do all that, or buy polyurethane or whatever all that shit was. So my Bultaco, what I did was on my Persang, is I taped it all off, and I just reversed the color so it looked completely stock. Had the same graphics with the stripes on the tank, and the same cutouts for the number plates, and I taped it all off in the garage, and I painted it this fluorescent pink. I mean, pink. Like fuchsia.
Right.
By the way, I think it's more like fuchsia, if you will. And I unloaded that thing at Saddleback Park, and the place went fucking apeshit. It was different than the helmet, but the thing that sparked it was one of my buddies went, when is he going to buy his bike pink? But it looked completely stock. It looked like a perfectly stock Bultaco, beautiful bike.
Right.
One of the prettiest bikes of all time to this day. But it was fuchsia. And so I went, all right, take that. And then it was a few years later when Brock Glover came out with the pink. And I didn't really know him at the time. I met him many years later at the Supercross. But he remembered. And he said to me once, he goes, yeah, I remember. Because you were the first guy with pink. Jackie Vimond wore the pink too. It's the JT stuff. Yeah. But Brock Glover's famous for breaking up the pink. And it's, by the way, it's still a really cool color. You got to give it. I mean, come on.
Absolutely. You know, the problem today is there's just too many colors between sponsors and all kinds of graphics on bikes, and everybody's trying so hard to look different. They all look the same. You know, guy shows up. Guy shows up with
a. They all follow each other because they all look at each other's stuff.
Yeah.
It's all really wild stuff. Like we were watching the race yesterday. I was watching Cincerello. He wears that Fox gear, and it's really cool. But it's like anything; it gets so convoluted that sometimes you have to go back to stock.
Yeah. Yeah. Time to just get back to basics and start over again.
Start over again.
How many years did the Bultaco mechanic thing go on for, and what were those years, Joe?
Oh God, when it comes to years, not that long. I think about 2 years or 3, and then the whole Bultaco thing kind of fell apart. The team did. And the guy, Dave Rogers, who originally hired me, fired me. And then after that, I worked on guys' bikes, just building motors and stuff for people that I knew in the industry. Oh yeah. And then, okay, I was living in San Fernando Valley, and I wanted to move, so I moved to North County, San Diego, to a beautiful town called Fallbrook, which is the avocado capital of the United States of America, and it still is. They make those beautiful Haas avocados that you buy.
Yeah.
And there's thousands of square acres throughout the hills of Fallbrook and Olivenhain and that area of California. So we found a house to rent. I was living with a lady, and we found a beautiful house to rent for $350 a month. and it was at the top of a dead-end street, but it was up high on a hill, and we had a 100-mile view all the way to Palomar Mountain and the whole valley below us and all the orchards. Couldn't ride there, though, because the whole place is orchards, and you cannot ride in this orchard because it's such an expensive crop. It's gold. Avocado sell for $2 a piece, during at certain times. But there were tons of other places to ride. But by that time, I was interested in doing off-road racing because I'd been motocrossing, and I just wanted to ride enduros and do some desert races for no reason whatsoever. It's just that's what I wanted to do. I've always been one of these guys like, I'm going to try that. So I knew I could moto already, so I bought an IT-175 Yamaha, which was a bitchin' bike.
Oh, yeah.
And I started doing, still is, that beautiful blue. Those things were cool.
Yeah. So this has got to be like 1976, 77.
Yeah, 76, 77. And I got a job at a place called Alba Honda, and this guy named Tim Daly owned it, and he was a Bultaco dealer originally, and then he bought a Honda franchise in Encinitas, which is one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in North County, San Diego. Still is. There's all sorts of, big fancy homes on the hill that you see. But anyway, he bought a Honda shop. He sold Bultacos, and he helped me out too. And the name Alba Honda comes from Bultaco because there was a windstorm. It was his father's shop. The B and the O blew off the sign.
Yeah.
So he just said Alba. and he got the shop from his father. It was down in El Cajon, California. Chula Vista, actually. Just near the Mexican border, right?
Yeah.
Within 10 miles. It's right there. And so he goes, so he had to go to City Hall. You know how you go and you register the name of your business?
Yes.
But he didn't have the money to replace the big plastic, so he just called it Alba. And it was, because I just called it Alba. And that was good. That stuck for years. And that was a really cool little place because he sold Bultacos. Then he later got enough money to buy the Honda shop. And he hired me to sell bikes at the Honda shop. And it was a big dealership. He was one of the top 10 dealers in the country. And he had, the main line was that, but he still sold Bultacos. But by this time, Bultaco had really kind of waned. But I wasn't very good at selling bikes, and then he ended up firing me, which was fine. We're still friends. I love the guy. But, I wasn't doing a very good job. I sucked at it. And remember when we used to read newspapers? Remember those things that used to come, they were on paper, and they had these printed words on them?
Yeah, I do remember vividly, sure.
And of course, everybody got Cycle News. Cycle News was the Bible of the motorcycle industry.
Yeah.
And as far as I'm concerned, it still is, even though it's digital. But it's still a brilliant, and they cover everything. It's motorcycles and it's in Cycle News, except for the chopper shit and all that. But I mean, anything racing. There was an ad in the back. Remember we used to look for ads, like we're hiring or, jobs wanted?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. There was an ad for test rider needed at Kawasaki Motors up in Santa Ana, California. So I called up to the ad after I got fired. And I talked to the guy. I'm not going to mention his name, and you know who he is, but I don't want to mention his name because I find him utterly reprehensible in every way.
Okay. Yeah, I do. I do know who he is, but go on.
Yeah. I kind of, he goes, all right, because he knew who I was from those days, and he knew that I'd done a lot of riding, and, not, national caliber, but I did know motorcycles pretty darn well at the time.
Hey, Joe, you know what I want? You know what I want you to do, because I don't want either one of us or the people to get the wrong impression. Don't say the guy's name, but why don't you tell me the other three really great guys that work at Kawasaki who it isn't? It wasn't. It wasn't Norm Bigelow. It wasn't Brian Farnsworth. It was somebody else.
Yes, it was somebody else.
Okay, because you know what I'm saying? I wouldn't want somebody to think that somebody was a dick when they're really not. And
Oh no, Norm Bigelow is one of the. That's a whole. And by the way, who I hardly knew. I knew him from CMC days, and
Right.
then we got to be friends when he worked at Kawasaki. And a nicer, more decent human being.
Okay.
You're not going to know.
Okay. So Joe, you answer the ad, you go down there, and you get hired. But what? There's like a conflict between you and the guy. How long does that last? What happens?
2.5 years. I was there and I was a test writer, and it was in the R&D department, which is research and development.
Right. What did you test?
Not race team.
What were you testing?
We're testing the production bikes. It has nothing to do with the factory bikes.
Okay.
Nothing. People confuse that. They go, "Oh, you're riding factory bikes." I go, "No, we're not. We're developing the production bikes, the bike that you buy at the dealership.
Mm-hmm.
That bike." And we did everything. We tested the motors, the frames, the suspension, and there was a lot to learn there. And I learned a great deal. But there was always friction between myself and the boss of that operation.
Right.
And I walked into my office one day, and he goes, "You're fired." And what was weird is that was on a Friday, and that Monday, 48 hours later or 72 hours later, whatever, I was going to turn in my 2-week notice because I knew that I wasn't wanted there anymore. So, and I was, as a gentleman, I was just okay, let's listen. This, it's not working. We've been doing this for 2.5 years. We tested the 500, the 250, the 125. Whatever the hell they had, we tested it.
Mm-hmm.
And did all sorts of stuff. We even tested the police bikes. Now, that whole department was only for dirt bikes. The police bikes were a separate thing, but they kind of lumped it in because California Highway Patrol was using the KZ-1000. So we worked with the police academy and worked with the guy who were really, boy, those guys were good too, man. You can't believe how good of riders they were. With those stupid-looking black and white Kawasaki's, with the floorboards
Yeah.
and the sirens. They were horrible to ride. The guys at the police academy were heroes. They could ride them around a motocross track. That's how well trained they were. You don't want to mess with the CHP on street bikes. But anyway, I got fired. And about a month later, a man, Dave Brockett, rest his soul, he's gone too.
Mm-hmm.
He called me up, and he goes, "Hey, Joe," he goes, "I need some help." And I just knew him through the company. We didn't really know each other. He was the accessories manager, because Kawasaki, despite what people think, aside from the Honda line stuff, remember that Marty Smith and Tommy Croft
Sure.
and Eierstadt and those guys wore,
Mm-hmm.
was actually the first of the Japanese companies to start like a whole line of accessories. I mean, everything. Oil, chains, sprockets, riding gear, helmets, the whole bit. So it was just getting started. And he goes, "I need some help to do the dealer show." And the dealer show is the big extravaganza
Mm-hmm.
where all the Kawasaki dealer, Honda, Yamaha, whoever, they do these shows in New York and New Orleans or Las Vegas or whatever. And they bring all the dealers there, 2,000 of them, or whatever it happens to be. And they do the whole show with all the bikes, all the accessories, all that stuff. Anyway, he needed somebody to just help him coordinate with all that and do some of the labor. In other words, get all the accessories together, box them up, load the bikes, get this shit going, and then they load them in semis. There were 4 Kawasaki semi trucks, semis, a big 40-footer, and they brought the displays and the bikes and all the stuff. Again, everybody does this. Every industry has the same thing. If you're in the whatever, you understand what I'm talking about.
I do.
And then they have all the dealers come, and each year it's in a different city. And from there, okay, here's how it gets really cool. The wonderful friend of mine, his name is Mike Vaughn, who I just talked to the other day. They needed to deliver bikes to shows like Beverly Hills 90210 and jet skis and stuff, to just load them up and then bring them to these companies. It's called product placement. In other words, if you're watching a TV show, some guy's using a Mac or he's eating, Raisin Bran,
Yes.
that's not by accident.
No.
Those are all paid for.
Mm-hmm.
They're paid for. People don't know this. If you're watching Seinfeld or if you're watching a, production of one or another, if they're riding a Kawasaki or a Honda in there, that's paid for. And that's called product placement. It's an entire industry unto itself. And there's probably 100 different companies that specialize in all this stuff. Anyway, these companies, like the TV shows, they hired all these guys that were like Hollywood, not really stuntmen, but guys that were just trying to get a job.
Yeah.
And most of them couldn't ride. But listen, I understand. They're trying to work, man. When you're a freelance guy, you take anything. So my buddy Mike Vonnie goes, just do the riding, too, when you get there. So he called up the ad agency that was spending millions of dollars. They go, Bonnello's just going to ride the bike. So they have a guy, he's a handsome guy, and he's sitting there singing a song or playing the guitar, picking up on the hot chick. But then as soon as they cut to the riding shot, that's me. And I've got, I'm in full helmet gear and all that shit. So nobody knows who it is. But, I can ride. So, it was one take. You want to do this, go around this corner, do this, go down a thing, ride down a slicer. And then it turned into all these TV shows. Same thing. They had all these guys that were like Hollywood guys, but they couldn't ride motorcycles. So when it cuts to the riding shot, not only I delivered the bikes,
Right.
and I would stay with them, or the jet skis. Now, the jet skis, I could ride them, but I'm too ugly to be on them because you're not wearing a helmet. But Kawasaki was very heavily involved in the whole jet ski thing. In fact, they invented it.
Yeah.
And they had some, guys like Christy Carlson, who was the world jet ski feminine champion. She was beautiful. And Scott Watkins, who was a guy, he was the world freestyle jet ski champion, and he looks like the guy on the cover of GQ. So they used those guys to do the action stuff. But I was in charge. Anyway, so it kind of evolved into this thing where they were sending me to deliver and or ride all the motorcycles and the jet skis on all of these photo shoots, both still photos and action. And after I got fired, I ended up working for the top 2 or 3 guys in the entire company.
How long were you there for? How many years did you go on after that, Joe?
About 14.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So
it was crazy.
While I'm thinking about it, Joe, were you part of that commercial Kawasaki Lets the Good Times Roll or any of that stuff? Or that was before your time?
I worked on all that. And there was a guy named Dale Bowler who I'm indebted to because he helped me to get started with my photographic career.
Mm-hmm.
And Dale he did a magazine. It was called Good Times. And it went out to every registered motorcycle rider in America. And at one point, that was like 3.5 million, how many they printed. And Dale worked at Cycle News, and then he worked for Cycle World magazine. I forget. Anyway, he was a hardcore guy, but he's a really, really smart guy. And he started that whole deal with Good Times magazine. But the whole Good Times role, anyway, it's kind of a weird deal. I met Dale from doing the riding and the hauling of the bikes. I'd literally load the bikes in a truck or in a box van or in my van and drive them to wherever they had to go. But a lot of times they just shipped them because it was too far. So eventually I got to go because they'd send me to do... Anyway, the Good Times thing. There's another thing, too, where the bike does a ZX11 that looks like it's going over the Verrazano's Bridge.
Yeah.
Yeah, New Jersey, between New Jersey and it's a ZX11, which was a beast of a motorcycle. But I did the riding in that thing too, although the whole thing's fake, to be honest with you. It looks like the guy's jumping over this big thing. These 2 wooden wraps that were about 5 feet apart. And what they did is they took a movie camera and pointed it straight up so the bike looks like it's jumping over it.
Yes.
Right? It was nothing. I hit it in first gear at about 15 miles an hour and just kind of did a bunny hop. And then they cut to the thing where it looks like the bike's up on the side of the bridge and it's riding over the top. that was all done with, digital or whatever the fuck it was called at that time. But I did all sorts of TV commercials, and so after I got fired, I got sent to go to do commercials as the rider and the bike handler both. Just because the guy knew that I could ride. It's like, here, just don't fuck with it.
Yeah.
Hire whoever you want. As soon as you get to the rice, you just get the guy that knows how to ride. I got to go to Canada, to Quebec, and British Vancouver, and I got sent to Cancun, Mexico.
Yes.
And that was just unbelievable. That was for a jet ski shoot. Again, I'm not in this thing, but I'm just taking care of the boats. Which meant put oil in them, put gas in them, wipe them down, make sure they look fine. And, they ran. The jet skis weren't that, they're not that reliable, to be honest with you. This is all where it's sit-downs now. So I worked with all these different film crews, really all over the world, and making, 5 times what I was making when I was actually working there. So I got the final word, and the guy that fired me was gone about 2 years later from the company. He quit and moved away, and then called one day to see if he could get some work from them. And he happened to call the guy that I was working for, my boss, Mike Vaughn. And there was some prior history there that I didn't know anything about. It had something to do with the bikes. But he was told to go packing and never contact the company again. Oh, I also got to go to Italy for 2.5 weeks for the world introduction of the Kawasaki Concours, the street bike. And I wasn't riding, but I drove this little Fiat van, this little piece of shit.
Yeah.
1,200 cc's, 55 mile an hour wide open. But they had the world press intro for the and we did an entire lap around Italy and down through Sicily and Mount Etna, the volcano. But on some of the days, some of the journalists that they took were tired, so I got to ride the motorcycles. I got to ride the concours. But I also had, because I was in charge of the loan pool down there at Kawasaki, which is all the bikes. So all the time, I would just take whatever I felt like and just go riding on it. And nobody cared because there was nobody in charge but me.
Yeah, I mean, nice work if you could get it. No question.
Oh, man.
No question about that. And, Joe, I failed to mention at the beginning of the show, for some people who are watching on their computer, this is the first week. This is the...
Sorry, folks. I apologize.
No. This is the first week I've ever had a slideshow where my guest has actually been the photographer on all the slides. So, which is my segue to, when did you pick up a camera and how did all that begin, Joe?
Right. It was in 1987, roughly.
Okay.
And I'd been working on but I'd also been working with these great photographers on these photo shoots where I'm doing the writing, or another wonderful guy named Thad Wolf was doing the writing. He may be listening. I hope he is. By the way, he was a national class road racer and still a fantastic rider, complete bike nut. We keep in touch. But I always had this eye for the photos. So one day I just decided, the hell with it, I'm going to pick up a camera and I want to learn the art. Now when you work with all these talented people, you watch what they're doing. You're there, you know what I mean?
Sure.
Even if you're in the picture, you're looking how do they light this? How do they compose this shot? How do they do this? And I was just soaking that up. And this wonderful gentleman, Dale Bowler, who's now in Colorado, I think. But anyway, he was kind enough. He worked for the Red. He was kind enough to help me kind of get going. Now, I already knew how to shoot pictures. I had a 35 millimeter camera, blah, blah, blah. But he really helped me to kind of get in the business and learn. And then, so I started shooting pictures on my own of just, static stuff, a bike sitting there or a pretty girl or, whatever, the dogs, but I already knew what I wanted because it just worked for me. It was easy for me to visualize and compose photos. And there's a difference between a picture and a photograph. A picture is that. Take the picture. A photograph is a photograph. It has meaning. It has lasting You know what I mean?
I do, and I'm looking at some of your work right now, and I could see
Yeah, you look
exactly
at it,
what
that's
you
a
mean.
photo, man.
Yes.
Yeah, that goes on the wall.
Yes.
Yeah, it's burned into your imagination. And that's what I wanted to do. I didn't want to take pictures. I wanted to create photos. But I worked with dozens and dozens of different, some of the great photographers in the country that were shooting all these ads and stuff. And the whole time I was just soaking it up. And then my buddy Dale Bowler helped introduce me. And then, okay, so there was another guy. I started shooting. And I was riding enduros at the time in Southern California, and I met a wonderful guy named Grant Polanski and Garner Polanski, who I'm still friends with. They're brothers. And Grant Polanski was Southern California District 37 enduro champion on numerous occasions. I'm sure he still hauls ass. But I used him for a photo model to shoot some pictures up at this place. This is another story. We're going to get way out of the thing here, but I lived on a 600-acre private, not estate, just dirt hills of Southern California, if you will. But anyway, but I had my own motocross track, and I had 2 or 3 tracks, and I had trails all over the place. I just burned. In those days, you could ride anywhere you want. Anyway, Grant Polanski was doing testing for Dirt Rider magazine, which was really the cool mag in the day. It was Dirt Bike and Dirt Rider.
Yeah.
And he introduced me to a guy named Bob Carpenter, who was the editor of Dirt Rider magazine. And so he started sending me, and to this day I love the guy. He started sending me work, but just technical stuff, like how to rebuild your forks, how to fix your fork seals, how to lube your chain. And I started doing that, and then I started just shooting, photos in my little workshop on how to do these technical things before I ever shot any kind of action photos.
So you were doing the repair and photographing it too?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, most of you can fake most of it. You hold out your hand and you shoot with the other hand. It wasn't real sophisticated, but from there, Bob Carpenter was kind enough to start hiring me to shoot the action stuff at Dirt Rider magazine. Not all of it. There was Mark Correa, who's still a good friend of mine, and a couple of other guys that were on staff. I was kind of like the third wheel, or whatever they call it, the odd guy out.
Right.
But then I started shooting pictures of bikes and the test bikes. And then he was having a baby, and where Bob Carpenter was, so he entrusted me to just start testing the bikes. And at one point, I ended up with about 13 bikes, an RM125, a KX500, a Husky 250, just because he wanted to take care of his family and try and run the magazine. So, he couldn't do all this stuff at the same time. So he goes, here, you start doing the tests. Same thing, I just hire one of my buddies, because all my friends ride, so I just get one of my buddies to hop on a bike and we all start shooting it. So that's how I got into the action part of it. It's all accidental. And then I was still riding out in the desert doing District 37 enduros, and I rode the Baja 1000 a couple of times. Same thing. Somebody got hurt, so I was like, hey, Bonnello, you want to ride part of the race? I go, yeah, okay, what the hell? I'll go right there.
Wow.
So that's how the whole thing kind of evolved. And then the photography thing actually started in France. I was sending photos to a French magazine called Moto Vert, which was the top magazine in all of Europe at the time. And they knew my stuff, so I'd send them stuff from California, and they'd flip, because in the middle of winter in France, it's like Illinois. It's freezing cold out.
Sure.
Right. So, it's hard to shoot test pictures in the snow or just on a gray, drizzly, shitty. And in Southern California in February or November, it's still about 80 degrees and the light's beautiful and you can do all this stuff. So that kind of evolved into a whole deal, and then, oh God, this goes on. I started sending my photos out to different publishing houses and stuff, and they started picking it up. And Motorbooks International hired me to do a calendar for them. So I did the calendar. And the calendar, it's called Motocross. You can still find it online or on eBay. But that's just the name of it. But it's not. It's off-road riding. It's desert racing. It's anything dirt-related. Could be enduro. It could be a motocross. It could be a supercross. It could be a guy just out trail riding. It's just a nice picture. And that's all it was. It was just a showcase to showcase my work. Because, again, I'm a motorcycle guy. I like everything but choppers.
I get it. Now, Joe, you've published how many books with all your motorcycle pictures and different things?
Well, first of all, I didn't publish any of them because I never had the money.
Okay.
But Motorbooks or some other company published them for me.
Mm-hmm.
Because if not, you got to put up the money.
Yeah.
And then who's going to sell it? You got to get it into the network, into the now everything's on eBay or through the thing, but at the time it was Motorbooks International, whatever. I also collaborated on my friend Mitch Bain, who was a fantastic editor of Motorcyclist. Well, first of all, at Cycle Magazine or Cycle World, then Motorcyclist. Then he started his own magazine called Moto Retro Illustrated.
Yes.
Which features Chris Carter in the final issue.
Yeah.
And I think I sent you some pictures.
Yeah,
but
I haven't.
He financed that whole thing by himself. It costs a fortune to do that stuff. So I didn't, and then Cherby's did. I got to go to South America to the Incas Rally in Peru. I just paid my own plane, so I was only about $500 or whatever to go to Peru. And Franco Cherby's, who owns a Cherby's Plastic, the plastic company,
Yep.
was putting on this big rally. It was called the Incas Rally. And I spent 3 weeks in Peru, which I absolutely loved. And I shot pictures. This is still on film, 35 millimeter slides. And I sent the photos to Italy, and there was a Japanese lady working there. She was on the thing too, and I forgot her name. Kind of embarrassed. And she did this hardcover book that Franco Cherby's financed. And there was only X amount of them, and they went out to clients. And it's a hardbound book in a beautiful case and all that. And then a few years ago, my friend Mitch Bain did an article on a guy named Malcolm Smith.
Yeah.
I think he has something to do with motorcycle riding.
Yeah, I have that book right here on my shelf. I'm looking right at it.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, and then now Malcolm and his wife Joyce actually financed that book by themselves. And I have an autographed copy of it from Malcolm himself. And there's a number of my photos in there. In fact, the opening photo is one that I sent you. It's of Malcolm sitting there with a husky in the background.
Yes, and...
Yes. By the way, it's the wrong bike.
Well, it's still a husky, so let's...
Right. That's all I was at this place. They live in Riverside, California here, not too far from his shop. And he didn't have one of his original,
Huskies?
No, the film, the great film.
On any Sunday.
On Any Sunday. But he had a motocross bike, which he never really rode. It's just a bike that was sitting there. So I put it up. We shot that in his yard, right there in front of his house. But if you look close, you'll see it's a CR. It should have been a WR, with the big tank and all that.
But you know what, Joe? You mentioned something before, and you said, sometimes there are pictures and sometimes there are photos. That truly is a photo of Malcolm. It does tell a story. Yes. I think he's barefoot too, which is really kind of cool in the picture.
Barefoot.
And the sun's going down, and when you think
there was about 3 minutes of sunlight left when I shot that.
Yeah.
And we used a little gold reflector right behind them, just to, one of those fold-out things. And I knocked off about 5 or 6 shots, and I looked at it, I go, that's it, we got it. And then the sun went down, it was over.
Joe, I have to do this. I have a question of the week, and it comes in from a gentleman named Dwayne Dunlop, and we give away AMSOIL when I use a question on the air. So Dwayne Dunlop wants to know, and I think we all kind of know the answer, but I thought it was a good question at the beginning. What is really the most difficult part of publishing a book?
The money.
Yeah.
It's expensive. Again, all the books, I've got about 10 books, I think. I never paid for any of them. It was all done by a company. Remember, once you publish it, you still have to sell it.
Yeah.
Well, who's going to sell it? You have to have a distributor. It's just like making bikes. You can make the greatest bike in the world. Nobody's selling it. What are you going to do with it? It's not going anywhere. But to the answer to Wayne, is it Wayne or Dwayne?
It's Dwayne, Duane.
Well, Dwayne, go for it, but you need to find a publisher. Because if you don't, you're not going to get distribution. You're not going to sell enough of them on eBay. I can tell you that right now. That's not going to happen. It's not. You need to find somebody that will go, I'm going to get it in the motorcycle shops, or I'm going to get it with a book distributor. And like I said, all the books, too, 99% of them are all published in either Taiwan or China, and now I think Thailand, because that's the cheapest way to do it. And they also happen to do the best work. This stuff is just flawless. But that stuff is all done there. But you have to have your ducks lined up before, or find a distributor. You must distribute. You're not going to sit there 10 hours a day boxing up books and sending them out to 20 different clients. Filling out the
Sure.
FedEx form and shit. Come on, man. What are you, hallucinating? That's not going to.
No.
It's not going to happen.
Well,
You have to find a distributor. But listen, thousands of books come out every month on different subjects of every, from science to politics to space travel. They're getting done. There's a lot of distributors. But if you're doing a motorcycle book, it's a very limited market. It's just motorcycle people. You're not selling, like a political book on the life of John F. Kennedy or, whatever.
right.
A lot of these books that are coming out now on politicians and stuff. It's a very narrow market. So you have to really look at the finances, Dwayne. And if you're listening, I wish you nothing but the best, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart. And by the way, if you ever get it published, send me a copy.
Now, Joe,
I'll send you a copy of one of mine.
you sent me in my slideshow. I'm only allowed to put like 100 pictures in this slideshow program that I use. You sent me
Are we still on the slideshow?
Oh yeah, but you sent me way more than I could use. But believe me, the ones that you did send me are absolutely brilliant. And there are a couple that I want to ask you about. And you could tell me about what was going on there, how you captured the shot. Let's start off with Ricky Johnson giving everybody the finger.
I was doing a photo shoot for what the hell was it called? I think it was called Motorcycle USA. It was a website. Motorcycle, yeah. And they were testing street bikes at Fontana Raceway, which is a big raceway. It's like Daytona, except for here in Southern California. It's a big, one of those big oval. But they have 2 or 3 infield tracks, where you. So anyway, I was just there shooting for them. They were testing 4 or 5 different street bikes, and at the same time, those tracks all rent out. It's like Willow Springs. There's cars using one track. There's go-karts using another track. It's on a Tuesday or a Wednesday. I don't remember. And there was somebody out. There were 2 or 3 teams on the racetrack testing stock cars, not the full-on. What do you call it?
Not like NASCAR, but
no, not NASCAR. The one level down.
Okay.
Whatever that is, cup cars or whatever they're called.
Okay.
Not much. Anyway, and I'm standing there at pit lane and watching the cars go by, which is like watching paint dry. And this one car pulls up right in front of me, and this guy leans out the window and says, "Hey, Bonnello, fuck you." We can say this on TV. Anyway, bleep you, but and he gives me the double. And I'm looking at him. It's Ricky Johnson. Ricky Johnson, at one time, the greatest supercross and motocross rider in the world, hands down, the biggest star in the world. But he got into car racing later and all sorts of other stuff, and I knew him a little bit, and he was just having fun, and I happened to snap the picture standing there. And the whole thing lasted about that long, about 10 seconds. And I just laughed because if you really look, you go, "Oh, that's Ricky Johnson."
Yeah, I mean, when I first looked at it, the picture was so close, and with his head stuffed in that helmet, it just didn't
Right.
it didn't really look like him at first, and I thought it was some stock car guy or something. But
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
another picture you have here, you have Chuck's son in a beautiful mountain range, snow covered. It looks like it's in the Alps or something. I mean, where did you get this picture?
That's the wonderful Chuck son, who I adore. That's him riding a 950 KTM in Yosemite Valley, and we were riding back from Hangtown. He just jumped in. I was doing this ride kind of thing with a couple of friends. These two idiots that worked at Dirt Rider magazine, Dumb and Dumber, and my buddy Russ Stratton. And we were riding back. So anyway, I did this big ride back from Hangtown one year. And we came all the way down through the Sierra Mountains when we took twisties the whole way. And late in the day, we stopped in Yosemite. And it's a famous place. It's the photo that you see in the Ansel Adams photos and calendars and postcards. People have the same exact location. And it's just a place. It's a place where tourists can turn out on the road leading out of Yosemite. And you look down into the valley. And there is Half Dome and El Capitan. And on the right, I thought it was Angel Falls. That's Yosemite Falls. And it's one of the most iconic places in the United States of America, in all of North America, and for that matter, in the world. That's Yosemite Valley. And that's the great Chuck son, the 1979 500cc. And by the way, Motocross the Nations, right?
Oh, yeah.
Johnny Hansen. Yeah, he's Chuck's son, man.
And national champion, too. Now, there's an incredible picture here of Jay Leno. And
Of who?
you've heard of him. Guy with the big chin, blue eyes, has a lot of motorcycles and stuff. Jay Leno.
Oh, Jay Leno, that guy.
Yeah. You've got a real professional. Not that your pictures are not professional, they are. But I mean, this looks like a headshot for a nightclub
I'll
thing
tell you
or
the
something.
truth on that.
Yeah. What?
I spent 90 seconds shooting that shot. 90 seconds. If it was a studio, they would have spent 2 days on it. They would have had a hair and makeup girl. They would have had a stylist. They would have had 3 different lighting crews. They would have had his agent. I was doing a photo shoot for AMA magazine, and that was on the cover.
Yeah.
And his name is Grant Parsons, who I barely met, but he called me one day and goes, "Listen, can you take pictures of Jay Leno in his collection down in Burbank?" No, I'm too busy.
Yeah.
Are you kidding? Yeah. I think I gotta go get some beer today. I'm too busy for this. But anyway, we went to his place in Burbank, California. And what it is 3 big giant warehouses. They're just industrial space. And they're up against the Burbank airport. They're in a cul-de-sac. So if you went around there, you'd never know what was inside of them. Well, what's inside of them is tens of millions of dollars of cars and motorcycles. And these big industrial motors, he's into these big industrial motors, like these giant things with that were used to, I don't know, to pump water or something at the hydro dam or some shit. He's got a bunch of those, too. He's got everything. And it's row after row after row, building after building after building of stuff. But anyway, I just wanted to get a picture of him. So I go, "Come here." So I set up 2 lights, and he sat on kind of like a milk crate.
Yeah.
And I knocked off 4 shots to go bang, bang, bang. I already figured out, what the exposure was. So that's it. There's just a light on the right and a light on the left. And I go, "I think you've done this a few times." He goes, "Yeah, I think I got it down." He's got a real dry sense of humor. And he just sat on the stool, if you will, which was laying in the corner. It was just I don't know. We're sitting there. I go, "Here, just do this." I took a couple of light readings. I went boom. I looked at the back of the camera. It was perfect. And I took up 4 shots. Boom, 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 boom. Done. And that was the cover shot of AMA magazine. And it's as good as anything you're going to find in Hollywood
Absolutely.
or studio or anywhere else.
It absolutely is.
No question.
You've got 2 more pictures here, and I'm going to ask you about a few more of them after that. But you've got Gary and Dwayne Jones and a picture of Gary by himself. I mean, the pictures are unbelievable because it looks like it's actually dark out, but you've got some incredible lighting, and you've captured the bike. And Where did that happen? Why were you taking those pictures of the Jones boys?
And you're right about all of the above. That was at Tom White's place, who's sadly gone now as well.
Yes.
At his museum in Yorba Linda. And Gary Jones was there, but he's a funny guy because, people, he's a four-time national motocross champion. His brother Dwayne was also not champion, but still
a great rider.
By the way, Dwayne Jones passed right not long after this photo was taken.
Oh.
And Gary Jones, I met him, I forget what the heck was going on. I don't know the backstory anymore. I used to meet me at Tom White's. Well, that's his bike. That DT1 is what he rides around on all day. That's Gary Jones, four-time national motocross. He rides a DT1 to this day. I know. And he works at Hinson Clutches.
Is he still over there at Hinson?
I don't know. I haven't talked to him for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And I didn't know him back in the day either. Of course, I knew who he was, Gary Jones. And I got to know him just a few years ago. And he's wonderful, and he's funny and gracious. And he was cool enough. Anyway, that shot, if you look close in the background, that's a swing set. In the back. Oh, yeah, it was in the park. It was at the public park. And they have the kiddie rides and the swing set and the slide and all that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so same thing. I just go stand over there. I put the bike in the background. I use the same standard 2 lights set up. I got these 40-year-old flashes that I use, a couple of old Norman flashes. And we knocked off 3 or 4 shots. And then the other shot of him and his brother Dwayne was at Tom White's. And the reason that I picked that is because that white DT1 is Tom White's personal DT1 that has 34 miles on it from new. I don't know where he got it, but that's his, and I did a photo. And then Brother Dwayne showed up, but remember, the DT1 was the bike that led to the YZ.
Yes.
And the Joneses were the ones that developed it.
Yeah. The old man, Don, and of course the kids were testing it. Sure.
Right. Without the Jones, they were doing it in Japan too, but they were the guys that developed. And they did the exact same thing with the Honda Elsinore. Gary Jones was the first guy on the Honda Elsinore. Remember?
Yes.
Yeah, because you do the tanks and stuff.
Tell me about this great picture. I love it, of Jeff Ward with his little XR75, all the trophies behind him. Beautiful picture. What's going on there?
That is at Troy Lee's shop, which, by the way, if you're in Southern California, anybody can go to Troy Lee's. It's a shop. It's open, and he's got all sorts of bikes on display and memorabilia and painted things. And he's painted all sorts of shit. But it's open to the public. It's not some, like a race shop where you can't go in.
Mm-hmm.
I got an assignment to do an article for Moto Retro magazine again, and we contacted because Troy Lee at one time had all 7 of Jeff Ward's factory motocross bikes that he won the titles on. They were all in display at Troy Lee's. Right there, all of them, all 7 of them. The actual, and Norm Bigelow was in charge of all that. Anyway, so Jeff Ward was kind enough to show up, and I just had him, I asked him, he's kind of a quiet guy, and I don't like to bother him too much. But all that stuff you see in the background is all famous jerseys from famous riders. And then the bike itself is his original mini bike that he won his first title on, I think, in 1903. I think he was 4 or 6 years old. And that's Jeff Ward Racing Products on the tank.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what that means.
No, I knew about it. I figured, I didn't know if it was at Jeff's house, if he had that stuff, or where it may have been. It just seemed like there was a lot.
Troy Lee's. And like I say, anybody listening to this thing, if you're in Southern California, you're visiting, go to Troy Lee's. It's like a museum. It's like an encyclopedia of time, of all sorts of cool shit. And you don't need anything. You just get off the freeway at about 100 yards from the freeway down the 91 in Orange County. But just to get Jeff Ward for a few minutes, and he was very gracious, and he sat there and posed for a couple of pictures. I probably shot 5 or 10 frames, if that. And I just really like that photo. And even though I don't know him very well, I'm a huge Jeff Ward fan. He's one of the greatest that's ever lived.
Shell,
without question.
There's a bike laying in a desert, crushed. Sun's going down. And it looks like it has been there for a while. So how did you trip across that?
All right. A man named Greg Godfried, or Godfrey. Oh, God, I hope he doesn't hear this. He'll kill me. Started this little thing called the Nitro Circus. You may have heard of it. And it grosses tens of millions of dollars all over the world. Mm-hmm. But anyway, he called me up one day. He goes, hey, listen, this guy, Travis Pastrana, he's going to jump off a ramp. And they're not together, but the other picture of the guy doing a backflip up in midair off a ramp.
We're talking, wait a minute, we might be talking about two different pictures. I do want to ask you about that.
They correspond.
It does? Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt.
They're not connected on the email. I couldn't get them to jive.
Okay.
Travis Pastrana decided, I'm going to go off a ramp, and I'm going to do a backflip in midair, and then I'm going to drop into the Grand Canyon and then parachute to safety. I'm serious. There's the picture. So anyway.
That's Pastrana's bike when he let it go in the canyon?
Yeah, that's Pastrana's bike.
Oh.
So what he did was, first of all, they needed 3 Suzuki RMs. So what they did is they bought the Cycle Trader or the Recycler or whatever, and they bought these 3 shit bikes that were complete junk, but they ran. You don't want to use a brand new Suzuki. And by the way, the people at Suzuki were not real happy about this whole thing when they found out about it. But Pastrana being Pastrana, he's going to do what he's going to do. So they built a ramp. That ramp that you see in the photos, it's all steel. And it's unbelievable because it flips you straight up. It doesn't go out. It goes up.
Yeah.
It doesn't go out. It's not like, like an Evel Knievel ramp.
Yes, it sends you
so
up.
he did it up there. So what he did is, he flew off the ramp with the Suzuki. Then he let go of the bike in midair. Then he dropped about several hundred feet. Free dropping.
Free fall. Yeah.
And then when he's about 1,000 yards from the bottom of the sprint, it's called the Little Colorado Grand, and it's a tributary to the main Grand Canyon. Because the main Grand Canyon is a national park, and they wouldn't let him do it. There's no way. But this is on Indian land. It's on Navajo land. So they made a deal with the Navajo to let him do it. So anyway, Pastrana launches off the ramp, does a backflip in midair, drops about 1,000 feet, and then pulls the parachute, and then floats down. So this is the craziest story. And I'm standing. So I shot it. What I did is I got down about 50 or 80 feet below the rim, and there was a ledge. And by the way, it's so steep, it's like a Wile E. Coyote movie. You don't even want to look over because it doesn't taper down. It's vertical. It's like standing on the top of Half Dome. It doesn't slope down.
It's straight down.
It's not a slope.
Yeah.
It's straight. It's even concave for most of it. So anyway, he flies down, and then when he gets down to a certain point, which I got a picture of, he pulls the parachute, and he floats to the bottom. And then he gets back up to do it again, by the way. So anyway, so the bike just the bike dropped 1/4 of a mile through dead air and lands at the bottom of the Little Colorado Grand, and of course explodes on impact. And if you look at the picture there, that's the carburetor, and it had those, remember when the guys used to make those different colored tubes? You can still buy them, for the vent hoses.
Yeah.
See the red and the blue and the green? So I took that, and I just kept it for a memento. So I still have it. I have the carburetor with the vent hoses sitting up there.
But the bike is still...
Anyway,
go ahead.
And then what he did, too, is they had a helicopter, and the helicopter flew down to the bottom, picked me up, because that's how I got down there. I flew down to the bottom in the helicopter. But then part of the deal was with the Indians, they had to remove the bikes. You can't just leave it down there. It's sacred land.
That was my question. That was my question, really.
Yeah, but we tied a hook to it and some kind of cable, and the helicoptered it out. I have photos of that too. So he helicoptered that one out, and he dropped it off up on top. And then Pastrana got on another one which was a complete pile of shit that barely ran. It was like, puh, 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 puh. And he just goes, I just hope it doesn't stall when I get to the top of the ramp. But we didn't care. They didn't pay more than $500 or $600 for any of the bikes. They were just beaters. They were eBay beaters, if you will, or Craigslist beaters, if you will. But they ran. And then he did it again. And his mother was there. And he was going to do it a third time, and his mother goes, no more. She goes, I can't take this. Her nerves were shot. And anyway, listen, a couple of years later, so anyways, I got the carburetor and I got some of the parts off that bike. But you can see what happened to the bike. The thing was obliterated. Imagine shoving a bike off the Empire State Building.
Oh, yeah.
Clear it out.
Hey, Joe, there's a picture here that you didn't take. It is a picture of you on an old Honda XL or XR, it looks like. And you got a dog in a backpack.
Yes, that's my beautiful girl at the time. That was Susie Cream Cheese, named after the Frank Zappa song. That was taken. This is another weird story of just like, how the hell did that? Here, hang on. I'm going. There it is. If you look in the background, that's the 1970s. See the car, the Valiant?
Yeah.
And, that's a C&J Honda that I built. And it's got an Elsinore tank with a dent in it. God, if I can find somebody to take that dent out.
Yeah.
By the way, I put that dent in it without crashing, so that'll tell you what the rest of that is. It's a custom-made C&J Honda. It's got Marizocchi magnesium forks.
Yes.
This is 1976, I believe. It's a bike I built. I always wanted, long before this big dual sport thing, I wanted a bike that was street legal, that was a 4-stroke, that I could just go trail riding on because I rode all over Southern California. But I didn't want to have to load up and take my little taco. I just wanted a 4-stroke, so I built this bike. And it's a Honda XL350 motor with a Bill Bell 410 kit in it. And Bill Bell is the father of the great Mike Bell.
Yes.
And he worked at Long Beach Honda, and he made these kits. And it's got Preston Petty fenders. It's got a Honda Elsinore tank. It's got trick handlebars. It's got works performance shocks. And the beautiful dog was my girl, Susie Cream Cheese. And she loved to get into my backpack. She'd climb right in, too. She'd jump in there like she did, and go trail riding with me. And what she'd do is she'd put her face up on my right shoulder and look over my shoulder while we rode. So anyway, one day I went to the 4-stroke nationals because I lived near San Diego, and I could ride to the Carlsbad on some dirt roads from my house. I didn't have to get on the street. I just had to go over a mountain and drop down on this fire road. They came out right in the pits at Carlsbad, and this lady took a picture of me. I don't know who it was. Well, 30 years later, her name is Pam Santine. I became friends with the Santines because they're a part of the Dirt Diggers North, and they put on the Hangtown race.
Oh, yeah. Sure.
Right. Yeah. They're part of the Dirt Diggers. Diggers are cool,
Yeah.
I said diggers.
I heard you.
That's the joke,
I know.
Anyway.
Yeah.
God forbid. Anyway, got enough fucking vitriol. Anyway, and they were looking through an old photo album. Her daughter Kelly, who's still a friend of mine, she was 15, 16 at the time, and they were looking at the picture and they go, "That looks like Joe Bonnello. This is 35 years. This is the 1990s. Time has passed." And she emailed me the photo. She goes, "Is that you?"
Wow.
I'd never seen the photo before, remember. I was just sitting there.
Yeah, well, that's why I'm asking, because I'm saying, you're the photographer guy, and it's not that often you get good pictures of guys that are photographers, because they're the ones that are always...
Yeah, especially from 10 feet away. It's just hard to reach out that far and click the button.
Yeah.
But it turns out, Pam Santine, who I had no idea who she was at that time, like I said, we met years and years later, she goes, "I have this picture of you." And I saw it and I go, "That's me." So what are the odds of that happening? You know what I mean?
Slim and none. You know, it's...
No. Yeah, it's just non-existent.
Hey,
Especially, too, because they're from Northern California. They were 400 miles away from home.
You know, Joe, you have an unforgettable look. Let's face it, if you're in a crowd and 500 people are going to see you. They're not going to see the other 499 people. You just have that, you know, you have an aura that can be seen from the moon. That's just how you are.
Yeah, well,
so
I apologize.
No, that's okay. Hey, listen, there's a picture here of a guy on a Mako. I think it's Mike Chamberlain. Did you take the picture?
He's listening.
Mike Chamberlain listens every week, hoping that I bring his name up on every show I do.
Well, Mike, if you're listening, I talked to him yesterday. He called me. Hey, I know you guys are over there. He lives literally 5 minutes from my house. He's lived here for years. I had no idea. None. Anyway, that is a picture of Mike Chamberlain.
Yeah.
I didn't take the picture. I think Scott Hydring probably took the picture. He was a good friend and was a great photographer in his day, too. And the shot is, I'm sure, from Indian Dunes. It's not Bay Mare, where I met Mike. And it's not Saddleback or Wells. I'm sure it's Indian Dunes. And looking at the bike, I don't know if it was a 501 or a 490 or whatever the hell. Because the Makos all look the same anyway. They had those giant cylinders. But anyway, Mike was, I'll tell you what, that guy hauled ass.
Yeah.
For real. And he would win 250 and 500 class regularly in the pro class at Bay Mare in Southern California, and he could get it done. And I have the result sheets to prove it. And his name is on top of guys like Bob Grossi and Bob Hershey and a lot of the guys at the day that were, you know, really, really good in this area.
Mike is, he was a very accomplished, not only accomplished writer, but if you get a moment, listen to the interview. He is actually a brilliant machinist and has worked on things for NASA and so many other things.
All sorts of stuff. He's got all that stuff in some containers over here, all the machinery and stuff. He had a big machine shop in the San Fernando Valley.
Yeah.
And then he ran his own race team for a while and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, he's absolutely for real. And then on the more personal note, him and his wife, Joyce, had been really kind to me. I had some problems a couple of years ago, and they came to my aid, even after I hadn't seen them in 40 years. And, you know, that's people like that we need more of.
Well, you know, Joe, there wasn't a person that responded to my Facebook post about having you on my show that didn't have great things to say about you. And
well, I paid them all off.
Well, you did a good job, my friend. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. So I say, and I know Chris Carter's watching or listening.
Yeah.
And we talked just a little while before you called, and there's another one of those guys that just we're friends for life, whether he likes it or not.
And you know, while you're mentioning it, I do have to actually thank Chris Carter because he kind of made the introduction for you and I. I knew of your work. I knew you were a photographer and some of the things you've done, but I wasn't sure about calling you or how I should do it. And Chris said, no, this is what you do. And I listened.
Call.
Yeah. And here we are today. So my guest this morning has been Joe Bonnello, famed photographer, a racer, a wrench, a published book writer, and I don't even know where it could go on and on, Joe. It could go on and on.
Well, you know, I hope this little journey I'm on keeps going on and on because there's been some hiccups in it.
Yeah. Yep.
Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the photos and the people on the website, which I still have never looked at, by the way. We're doing this on the phone, but by all means, enjoy the photos, share them with your friends. I could give a shit. And, screensavers or whatever those things are called, or the photo snaps, have fun with them, enjoy them. That's what they're for. I'm done shooting them, and I already sold them, so you're on your own after that.
Thank you so much, Joe Bonnello.
Thank you, Joe Bonnello.
I'll speak.
I can't wait till we meet in person again.
We will, Joe. We will. I think you say au revoir. Isn't that how you say it?
Au revoir, mon ami. C'est comme ça.
Okay. I'll see you later.
See you later.
All right, Joe. Bye. My guest this morning has been Joe Bonnello with some of the greatest stories about his photography work, his time as a racer, as a wrench, and so many other things that he has experienced throughout the decades of being involved in the motorcycle industry. I once again want to thank everybody at Motion Pro for their specialized tools and for being a sponsor. Nightmare Racing, the best reproduction Kawasaki plastic on the planet. Russell Waters and Amsoil, the first in synthetic oil since 1973. Vintco. Have you checked out the Vintco catalog lately or been online? Over 700 products, some of the things that nobody else is making. Vintco, keep the ride going. Full Circle Racing, thank you, Tom McAllister. And whether it's vintage or modern, Full Circle is the place to go. Also great sponsors of our Wednesday show, where Full Circle is running a special right now. Go over and check out Vintage Motocross Q&A. You'll learn more about that special. Paul Stannard and Preston Petty Products. The legend continues. I want to thank you all for listening to my show today. For the sponsors, once again, to Chris Carter and Joe Bonnello, I wish everyone a very good week, and I hope you'll join me Wednesday night at 6 p.m. for another episode of Vintage Motocross Q&A. Thanks for listening.